Hey guys, welcome to another session of Epic 7. This is my initial thoughts video for Straze. Now, while I'm making this video, the data mine is not out yet. Apparently, Smilegate changed some of the encryption. So, although my desire was to pull up the data, like data mine, the damage calc, to be able to really solidify my thoughts on him, we'll have to go without that this time. So, well, as I'm making the recording right now, I don't know, maybe later tonight it will come out and I'll insert it into the video. We'll find out. But regardless, I think there's a lot of buzz. You know, it's Straze. You know, he could split planets in half. So, you know, really amazing. The animation, actually, if you look back on it, it's a bit outdated in terms of like what you're looking at on screen right now, like the hand drawn animation part. It feels like a bit outdated. The visual effects and stuff looks really good, and I think that's what people complained about for Archdemon's Shadow, that she didn't get like, you know, OP treatment. She just looked like what she looked like in episode 1. With that out of the way, yeah, ML Straze right now is being like, I see like a lot of YouTube videos, people saying that, oh, he's OP. When I saw his kit, I'm like, okay, defense pen, but conditional defense pen. I'm like, okay, alright. So, as you guys can hear maybe from my tone, I don't think he's OP. Not saying that means he's bad, but if you compare my tone to, like, say, the ML Kawazu video versus this one, you could definitely see, maybe you hear a distinction, but I'm not trying to make it super obvious, but I'm definitely on the... he's one of those heroes I'm like, yeah, he's a bit conditional to me, and that condition is... you guys will hear my thoughts. Regardless, he's warrior and Taurus, and of course dark. Straze looks really cool. I love his sword. I love his character design. His voice lines are really cool, at least the English ones for sure. The animation, in my opinion, it hits the mark for me. The stat line, it is interesting to see that he's a Taurus. So Taurus is like Euphine and Ice Cigarette. So if you have those heroes and you're gonna pull for him, definitely use them as like a basis for you mocking up your builds, whatever that ends up being. His imprint will be available as gold transmits, like with gold transmit stone, just like how they treated Archdemon's Shadow. But to my knowledge, yeah, you won't be able to get them in the coin shop, you know, after the month that, like, Archdemon's Shadow, she got like a grace period where you could pick her up from the coin shop after her banner. He doesn't seem to have that, so a bit of a different treatment here, but it's okay. It's all fair game there. But the imprints you can get with gold transmit stone. The imprint release is 10% attack, imprint concentration is 18% attack. That's a pretty high base attack there, as you can see, 1228. The health is okay. The defense is okay for a warrior. I tried to build him bulky, and I really couldn't hit the stats I wanted. Regardless, the speed is 109, and the defense, like I said, is 553. Crit rate is at 23, and then crit damage, you have an additional 15 over the usual base. So if you're familiar with Taurus warriors, like I said, Cigarette or Euphine, you should be pretty familiar with that right away. So in terms of getting the damage stats, it shouldn't be too hard on him. In terms of the crit damage, getting the crit rate to 100%, and then the attack, of course, getting it pretty high with an additional 18% on the imprint concentration. So far so good. For a warrior, 109 speed is not the slowest. It's not like super fast, but he's a warrior. Straze skill 3, Star Extinction. So attacks all enemies with the sword, penetrate defense of the target with the highest max health by 30%. So that's the base. Alright, so there's a couple things in here that we want to break down. So that's the base. You get a 30% defense pen. 30% is not bad. Like any bit of defense penetration would be good, especially now, again, he has high attack. You can get him to really high crit damage, and then you won't be really lacking the crit rate because of 23% base. When the caster's attack is greater than the penetration target's attack, penetration rate increases proportional to the difference up to a maximum of 100%. Now, that looks really good, and I think I actually have hold on, I have a screenshot. I think it's... oh, that's the S3, but this is the damage. I'm gonna talk about that in a bit, just to do a bit of a kind of like a reverse calculation. So there's a couple things here. It's conditional defense pen. So you start now comparing heroes who have defense penetration, and especially ones that can get to 100% rate. Okay, Watcher Shuri and Operator Cigarette right now are two of the, I would say, the main ones, especially in the cleave deck. Now a lot of people are already saying that he will be really good with a cleave team, because some people, like, okay, so like in RTA drafting specifically, like there's like three major ways to deal with cleave. Either you speed contest, but if you know you can't speed contest, most likely you're gonna try going for RNG, so whether that be some evasion, like Remnant Violet, MRSA, or something like that, or you're gonna go to bulk down. You're gonna bunker down with tanks, with barriers, and all that stuff. So most likely, if you run him into some kind of cleave comp, let's say like an Operator Cigarette opener, Oxlot's openers are not super prevalent right now because there's way to counter Oxlots. But let's say Operator Cigarette, let's say he does get an attack buff, and if they're bunkering down with Knights and Soul Weavers, then he's gonna kill something right off the bat, because most likely your attack would be higher and much higher than your target's attack. When you're gonna use him into a bruiser comp, I think what most people may be more comfortable with is to use him in a bruiser comp. That's where I feel that this skill starts falling off. So knowing that Straze has this kind of like attack differential to determine the amount of defense penetration, it's quite easy for okay, so it's like picture RTA drafting. You draft Straze, you draft an attack buffer. They see Straze and they think that, okay, Straze might not be a big threat, maybe they just ban your attack buffer, and they draft an attack buffer. So even if they're knights, if they drafted knights, let's say Last Rider Crow, FCC, which, you know, average maybe 1600 attack, 1700 attack. You know, some people run knights with higher attack. You get an attack buff, and that can really change quite a bit. You can say that, yeah, well, Dragon, like 50% attack buff on like a 1600 is not much, but here's where I wish I had the damage calculator, so I can calculate exactly how this formula works. Of course, this is very important in terms of the attack differential. So once you get to 100% defense penetration, you're gonna do the damage that is shown here, 34,927 on the FCC. If you start losing any bit of defense penetration, let's say it's 50% defense penetration, it's still gonna be good, but I actually don't think it can one-shot the FCC. At least a normal FCC. We're talking about like a 30 higher end RTA build, maybe like 30,000 HP FCC with, let's say, a 3k barrier, and like a 1500 defense. And I mean, if you have an Aureus, you have higher defense, but I guess it doesn't matter. If he has defense pen, it's fine. But what I mean is, like, if he doesn't get full defense penetration, how much damage are we looking at? So in the preview, and how it reads, if you don't think about all the conditions I just said, like your opponents can, you know, ban your attack buffer. They could ban him too, but let's say he makes it in, but they ban your attack buffer and they draft an attack buffer. Let's say like DN would be pretty decent counter to him, because he would need the crit damage to really make his damage work. But if they have a DN and somehow you had to ban someone else, then his damage becomes lower. So there's a couple things that need to happen, that his attack has to be higher than your opponent. If you're too tanky, there's a lot of variables, and I'm okay with variables. That's not how I usually, you know, start thinking about a hero if they're good or not. I remember when I did my Archdemon Shadow video, a lot of people was like, oh, she's too RNG, therefore she's not good. But, you know, a lot of people fear her because when she pops off, she really does. So variables are not something that would be something that will make the hero like less OP. I just think that again, I wish I had the damage calc, because if I had the damage calculator, we could see it on the screen and see what works or not. So what I see like right now, and not even talking about his other skills, is that he needs to me an uncomfortable amount of setup for him to be good. So in terms of he would need, if you're playing him like a regular bruiser, so not in a cleave deck, you're gonna need damage mitigation for sure, and you'll most likely need an attack buff for sure. Those two things I think you must have, and that's not to say that it's impossible to get into your draft, because you know people get attack buffers in all the time, have damage mitigation all the time, but you do need those. All right, so that doesn't make them bad, like I said, but my question would be like if the other single target nukers, so let's say Surmia, Ice Cigarette, although Ice Cigarette requires debuffs in order to get a higher defense penetration. Ice Cigarette, LQC is pretty good. Fiend, I would say, like, you know, because she doesn't have defense pen, but like I'm just thinking about all these like single target nukers, like why aren't they used more? Like Shu technically has a pretty decent single target nuke, defense pen as well. But why aren't these heroes used? Like that's what the question I pose on Straze as well, and it's because I think it's harder to draft in because they require too much setup. So you can pin yourself in a corner when you start drafting this setup, or you might just get countered anyway. So when I was building him, again, I was trying to make him like a high damage but bulky. So I was aiming for like even 3.5k, 300 crit damage, 100% crit rate, and try to get his defense and HP high. It was pretty tough. I would say it's as tough as Fire Charlotte in terms of like where all the stats go, but his damage stats would look a bit better. But remember, Fire Charlotte doesn't really need crit rate, so Fire Charlotte usually can look pretty good. And I would say, like, because of his baseline stats are pretty solid, I got him near Fire Charlotte, but maybe a bit lower in terms of stats. So that concerns me a bit. So in terms of like, he doesn't really have self-sustain. I mean, you could run him on Sigurd's Scythe, I suppose. But I feel like someone like LQC makes a stronger single target nuker than he does. Not even, I've seen people draft LQC straight into killing carrots, not even killing a dark target. It's because LQC has really good self-sustainability and brings AoE support as well. But again, I'm not saying just because he's not LQC means he's bad. It's just that I can definitely see that he would be riskier to draft because he requires so much around him, whereas LQC, you know, if they ban your adamant holder, she has innate adamant shield, you know, stuff like that. Every hero has a flaw. And the very last thing I want to touch upon this, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I definitely want to, you know, share all my thoughts on why I think he's not as OP as maybe what people are speculating. The last thing is this: when enemy is defeated, grants invincibility to the caster for 1 turn. So we did get a notice on the Straze video from the Epic 7 stream saying that it's granting no matter what. So as long as you cast the S3, you get invincibility. Now the invincibility for 1 turn, while that's good, I guess, it doesn't feel like it does much. This skill cooldown is quite long as well. Notice it's a 6-turn cooldown with a -1 on the Mola +3, so it's 5 turns. It's a very, very long fight, and because he has no other way of sustaining himself, again, like I said, maybe Sigurd's Scythe is the way to go. I don't know. I think in a cleave comp, if people are speculating that he might be really good in cleave comp, I think in a cleave comp he might have a better chance. But even then, I'm a bit like, cleave comp needs setup too, right? But I mean, people are getting really smart with cleave. They're trying new things with Flan, Opsig, and like Oxlots is, it's just because Politics and Selene exist. Oxlots is less used, but it's still not unused, especially in the last pick scenario. Yeah, so yeah, that's it for that skill. That's all the things I wanted to talk about here. And then, yeah, of course, the S3. I mean, look, Straze is such a cool character. Like I said, voice lines, animation, design. He's really cool. So in terms of, even if my speculations are right that he's not as good as, you know, he's portrayed, then it doesn't matter because he's Straze, man. Smaug's gonna buff him, for sure. I'm pretty sure. But if I'm wrong, that'd be great, because then we have a usable hero right off the bat. But I do feel that my I would say, if you call it pessimism, my pessimism is based on some grounds of like real theory. If you guys know me well enough, you know, obviously every content creator makes a mistake on their guess, but mine have been borderline accurate. Of course, I know I hold to a very, what do you call it, passive approach, I suppose, on a hero. It's like, yeah, we'll wait and see. But again, like I said, for ML Kawazu, I think that I was very hyped for him. I think he did turn out to be the way I envisioned him, because his skill sets were just like, it actually, to be honest, I think it's still very OP. He doesn't need as much setup as Straze, that's for sure. But again, you can't really compare the two apples to oranges. They do different things, but here's the damage. Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about. So the Ravi here, but right before Straze did his S3, Ravi was under 50% health. Okay, now we don't know the stats, and this is why like you can't really tell, you know, like what's the defense on the heroes, you know, on the ML Haze, on the Last Rider Crow, on the Ravi. He's hitting them through a barrier. In the video before he does the S3, Last Rider Crow and ML Haze had a barrier. I think it's FCC's full barrier. What you're seeing on the screen right now is that barrier re-procced because of Last Rider Crow accepting AoE damage. But it did do some damage past that barrier. Let's say, you know, that FCC HP is, let's say, 30,000. It did do some damage to the barrier. You can see there 493 on the Last Rider Crow, and then 271 on the ML Haste. Now, it's obviously that in this defense, that the Kisei did the S3 and damaged the Ravi to that degree. And like I said, the Ravi had less than 50% HP. Straze on the S3 with an attack buff, whatever stats he has there, he does 5,300 and I think that's 9. Sorry, that flares blocking. I think it's 9. 5,300 versus a 34,927 damage to the FCC. Now, assuming that FCC is on Aureus, some of that damage is also going into it from the damage share. So if you take a look at the 5,309 on the Ravi itself, and let's say he did a bit over 3,000, 4,000 damage on Last Rider Crow and ML Haste, then FCC is absorbing quite a bit of damage there. So the 34,927 is not straight from the defense pen, but of course that would be one of the considerations. So just because you could one-shot FCC at 34,000 in this showcase here, it doesn't, I don't think it really tells us much. Of course, some of you guys who are really good mathematicians may be able to just revert calculate it, assuming that FCC is on or there's 100% defense pen there with Aureus and the Ravi getting, you know, 5,309. The issue is that we just don't know the defense of the other heroes. So you can't exactly get a full picture here, but again, all the concerns I said is there. So you need an attack buffer with him. If you're thinking about RTA, you need damage mitigation because, like I said, to get the damage you want for the one shot, assuming you want it, remember you're trying to bridge the gap between your attack or Straze's attack versus the target with the highest HP, the one that the defense penetration is applying to. You need the attack difference there. And like I said, if the team on the right, if this was RTA and they drafted an attack buffer, let's say a very quick DN, and you had to ban someone else, then it closes the gap. And once you close the gap, like what's the threshold between, you know, 90% defense pen versus 100%? 100% defense penetration is 3 times the damage of what he would usually do. If you run the damage calculator for like Operator Cigarette, Watcher Shiri, well, actually Operator Cigarette would be a better one because she has a conditional defense pen, 100%. So if you click the damage calc, click on and off the barrier for Operator Cigarette, you see it's triple the damage, right, for 100%. So this setup here is like a dream setup. So in cleave deck, very good. I think in closed controllable PvP environment, so like arena or guild war offense, I think he's going to be really solid. Defense, I'm a bit skeptical on because again, you would need the same kind of setups, right? Like you can, people can cheese him knowing that, oh, he needs to be the highest attack, right? So if you have an attack buffer with him, like, could you apply an unbuffable versus him, or unbuffable to the attack buffer, assuming that it's not Mei Chloe or something else? Situational on a Guild War defense. I definitely don't think that he's going to be super strong on Guild War defense, but I could be proven wrong there. But definitely in a AI-based offensive team where you can have the right setup, I think he's going to be solid. Just like how people used Operator Cigarette with Ocelots, not the speed opener type, which RTA is more prominent there, but the kind of like the Ocelots to, you know, nuke out some kind of offense, Guild War offense arena comp. Or defense arena comp, Guild War. And then as to Destructive Gaze, attacks all enemies with a wave of force and dispels 2 buffs. So ignore effect resist of any target with the attack lower than the caster's attack. When there are 3 or fewer enemies, damage dealt increases with fewer enemies. So the S2 I would definitely say is one of his strongest abilities. If the S3 is very conditional, the S2 is much less conditional. The very fact that it's only a 3-turn cooldown, no reduction in the Mola, but you can decrease the skill cooldown by 2 if you soul burn it. I think this makes it one of his best skills. Arguably, I've heard people say that, you know, he has like kind of a mixed chemistry between like the S1, S2, S3. I would say it's not super forced because you can hold skills for certain turns as well, assuming that your Straze doesn't die in terms of like a bruiser draft or a knight draft. Like attacks, it's all AoE. So the one benefit is that his S2 and S3 are AoE, so it's pretty decent. Again, we need the damage mods for this, but there won't be, I don't think the damage is the point for this, although there will be an extra form of damage based on the 3 or lower enemies, 3 or fewer enemies. We'll have to see how that scales. But the ignore effect resist on any target with attack lower than his, in my opinion, that's very good. Ignore effect resist. So people are already saying that he's a Mei Chloe counter. I definitely have to say I agree on that. Again, you do need to make sure he has an attack buff though. While you can probably strip the Mei Chloe's revive and attack buff, you'll most likely be going again with the 15% resist RNG with the other heroes who have Mei Chloe's buff. So it does dispel 2 buffs. I do believe that it would be individual rules. So it like, let's say Mei Chloe buffs your opponent's team, use Straze's S2, and he's not the highest attack at that point, and maybe some of the DPS on the opponent's team is, then you're gonna get, I think, RNG rolled on one of the 2 buffs, right? So maybe for some you will dispel the attack buff, some you will dispel the revive buff, some you may not dispel at all if you get really unlucky. And some you'll dispel all of it. But do keep in mind that if they have immunity and they already have the buffs and you don't bypass the immunity check, none of the buffs get stripped, right? Well, actually, no, that's not true. If you don't bypass if you don't bypass both immunity checks, then you can't strip the attack or the revive. So in a way, he is a counter to Mei Chloe. But not like a direct counter, but definitely useful. And like I said, out of all his skills, I definitely think that his S2 is the one I like the most. It's conditional, ignore effect resist, kind of like ML Kawazu's S3. He has to have the vigor, and I like that. I think that's fine. So yeah, no more comments on this, except again, we need the damage calc. And then S1, again, needing the damage calc, but I think it's a fairly good S1. Increasing self-combat readiness will definitely help. I think, again, his struggle would be that you would need to draft too much support, and that is whether or not he's in a cleave comp or a bruiser tank soul weaver comp. He would just need support. But hey, you know what? A lot of people will be like, Jagan, a lot of heroes need that. And you're right. And you're right, and that's why I'm not saying that he's bad. I just think that the condition to make him OP is not quite there myself. Where I envision him, if you guys trust what I say, of course, where I envision him, I definitely say that if you're not a cleave player in World Arena, I think that drafting him early is a risk. So you want to kind of go with your bread and butter. You want some knights, you want to steal picks. But I don't think he's gonna be a highly contested one. I do think that you'll probably see him more often. Like once the dust settles, in terms of like the hype of like, you know, the first week of Straze or the first 2 weeks of Straze, everybody's gonna use him, everybody's gonna draft him, make videos or whatever, what have you. They're gonna test him out for sure. But after the dust settles, I think his proper placement will most likely be in like the 4th, 5th pick option. I know a lot of heroes fit in that realm, but he does feel more like a reactionary kind of counter pick. And even the counter pick is not like a heavy counter. Like I said, there's ways to deal with him, just to ban your attack buffer, or they get an attack buffer, and then you might be put into a scenario where drafting him might not be the best idea. That's what I think. In terms of sets and artifacts I haven't given it too much thought, to be honest. If you can secure the 100% defense pen, you probably don't need something like a portrait or symbol of unity. People are saying Draco Plate for the damage with damage mitigation. I think that's okay. You know, people are saying Durandal. I don't know about Durandal myself. I don't know. He has a lot that you could use, I suppose. But in terms of sets, I think that's actually where it's more important. The set, I think, will determine the artifact he uses more than the artifact first. So I try to think about him with like a lifesteal set and play him kind of like a Remnant Violet. But you know, I couldn't get myself to really think about, like, Remnant Violet is pretty strong as a bruiser, lifesteal bruiser. So like players would play him like they won't S3 with him until they need to heal. So that's very smart. Even LQC, some players who are more methodical will not play LQC's S3 unless they know they can nuke out a target on turn 1. But they'll keep it for the heal. Those like Remnant Violet, LQC, they both have defense pen. So I think the comparison is pretty safe here. If you can build a good Straze on lifesteal, that's how I would play him. Some people are thinking counter set. I think counter set is okay as well because of the combat readiness. I think that's what a lot of people just, you know, they just go to it. Speed set, I tried putting him on a speed set immunity, and again, like I said, it's a bit of a struggle, more surprisingly to me actually. Kind of a struggle to keep him in a decent balance of speed, damage, and then bulk to survive, but then also high enough attack. I was kind of surprised because, like I said, he has the damage-based stats, so technically you can lower those, lower the damage stats on your gear and look for more bulk. But his bulk is not like incredible. But yeah. So I think one of the major things would be like his S3. I definitely have to say it's a bit of a wild card for me if you're going for defense pen. Having high attack is important on him because you want a higher chance of getting or succeeding with 100% defense penetration. The critical hit damage also plays a big part because you want to make sure your defense pen actually kills the target. So like the balance of the two is quite I feel the demand is quite high, but again, a lot of my I guess skepticism could be mitigated once we get the damage mods. Once I could play around with the numbers and stuff like that, I think we could get a solid answer on whether or not he's as OP as he thinks. But like I said, the 3 sets I'm thinking, counter set, lifesteal set, and speed set, I think all have some viability. I personally think the counter set on him would kind of be like a counter set on a Rylet, and even Remnant Violet has more survivability than him, in my opinion. But that being said, lifesteal Rylet, if it's lifesteal Straze with Sacred Scythe and he's decently bulky, that could be a way to go too if you're in for a long game, right? And outside of that, like I said, I think in a cleave deck, I think he's okay. He does do AoE damage. He does do AoE damage on 2 skills, so it's not like it's bad. But I'm comparing him more towards the kind of like the single target nuking family. And what I said before on, you know, why aren't the Euphenes, Sirmias, ice cigarettes used more often? Operator cigarette and RTA is not even used really for the S2. The S2 is like a benefit. It's really the S3, the opening. Attack buff with pushback and strip. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but whatever. If I'm wrong, like I said, if I'm wrong, we have a usable and very hype hero. If I'm right, then potentially we see a buff in the future. So regardless, it's not a loss. I would definitely pull for him just because he's really cool. But I definitely can't, you know, put a pin on him and say that, oh, he's a must-have. I can't say that right now. I definitely can't. That's how I see him. Anyways, unless I get the damage mods, which I'll insert or edit into the end of this video, if I do get it, I'll insert it. If I don't get it, that's the end of this video. So if you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server. Follow me on Twitter, subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next time.